Welcome back to a new episode of How to Reach 2000. In this game, we're starting off with a rating of 900 and we're playing against a person who's rated 1000. Let's start off with the move d4. We get d5, very principled move which controls the center and prevents us from going e4 and controlling the whole center. Bishop f4 develops the piece to a natural square. Black often goes with the move c5 to counter this pawn, and we can go with the move e3 to defend this pawn. This is called the London system. Many people hate this opening, but I like this opening. The reason why I like this opening is because it allows quick development of the pieces, and white has a very solid center. Let's play the move e3. This opens up the bishop towards the knight, and we have the option to take this knight. Once we take the knight, black will have doubled isolated pawns on the a file. Black plays the move knight to f6. Knight to f6 is a good move. It potentially has ideas of going to the e4 square. We can play the move knight d2. It's a very flexible move. We have the move knight to e4, and we can simply capture the knight, and after pawn takes, we can potentially attack this pawn. We can also play the move c4, which takes more space, but after c4, there might be the move e5. e5 sacrifices a pawn, but it allows the bishop to get a check, and our king has to move. I'm not sure if I'm willing to do that. Let's play the move c3. c3 is a very solid move. It overprotects the pawn on d4, and we have ideas of playing queen to c2 and putting pressure on this pawn. Black plays the move bishop to f5, which defends this pawn, but now in this position we have a tactic that wins a pawn. We can play the move bishop takes a6, and after black captures, we have queen to a4 check, which wins this pawn. This pawn here is kind of annoying, and it gets in the way of our development. We want to play the move knight f3, but currently that's not possible. Rook to b8 is an interesting move, which undefends the a7 pawn, but it counterattacks the b2 pawn. I'm not sure if I'm willing to take the risk of the rook infiltrating to the 7th rank and breaking up my structure. After the move rook to b8, I'll probably play a move like queen to e2, which defends the pawn. It's a very solid move, and I don't have to do anything crazy because I'm already up material. Let's bring the queen back to the e2 square. It's a very safe move. Yes, I'm playing some queen moves, but I want a pawn, and my queen doesn't really have a purpose on the a6 square. So I just want to get out of the way. Black offers the trade with bishop to d6, and we can simply take the bishop because we're up material. This trade is not bad for us, and we're simplifying down into a simpler endgame. An interesting way to break up this center is to play f3, and after pawn takes f3, we can play knight takes f3, and this develops the piece. But the drawback of playing the move f3 is it opens up this diagonal, and it allows the queen check on h4. So I'm just going to play a move that attacks the pawn, and also it clears the way for this knight to move. Now I get tempo and improve the position of my queen. I don't want the queen on the e2 square, because I want my knight to go to e2. Black plays this move, which defends the pawn. Now we can play the move knight to e2 and play this in the future, and also castle. We can also bring the knight to c3. It's a very pleasant position to play this with the white pieces. Okay, we get castles. We can also castle. The knight on e2 prevents the idea of going f5 and then f4. This is a good move. Doesn't really have a threat, but it could put some pressure on this pawn. I'm gonna play the move c4. c4 opens up the square for this knight so we can bring the knight in. And also this move is no longer a good move because we can take, and pawn cannot take because we can simply capture the bishop. And just when I was saying this, black plays this move. The issue with this move is after it takes, they either have to take with the queen or the bishop, and both of them are not ideal for the black pieces. The reason why it's not ideal is because black is going to have these doubled pawns on the e-file. Let's take. Okay, pawn takes. Pawn takes is a bad move because the move c4 and c takes d5 opened up my queen, and there's a bishop on the other side. So white can play the move queen takes c6. After a move like rook to c8, we have to make sure that we don't allow the black pieces to infiltrate and get active. The move queen to a4 is an obvious move because it prevents the rook from infiltrating to the c2 square. Queen to a4 prevents rook c2. Also, it puts pressure on the a7 pawn. Our idea is to bring the rook to the c file and offer a trade. Remember the fact that offering trades is beneficial for the white pieces because we're up a bishop and a pawn. we're up enough material that we don't have to worry about winning more material. Black plays the move queen to h5, which attacks our knight on e2. We can either defend the knight, or we can move it away to a square where it puts pressure on the queen and the pawn. We can notice that the pawn on d5 is a backwards pawn, meaning that there are no pawns behind this pawn that can potentially support this pawn. So only pieces can defend the d5 pawn. I really like the look of the move knight to f4, which puts pressure on this pawn. This move also attacks the queen, so black has to respond to this. The queen moves to the g4 square, and that undefends this pawn. We can be greedy and we can take this pawn. Knight takes d5 also has the threat to play knight to e7, which forks the rook and the king. Black plays the move rook takes c1, which relinquishes the control of the c file. We can play the move rook takes c1, and now we control the only open file. And once again, remember that this move is not possible because we take the rook, and after the queen takes rook, we have a fork of the king and the queen. f5 is an interesting move. It might potentially threaten to go to the f4 square. We have to notice that our queen is not very optimized. It could go to a better square and then put pressure on the black position. Let's look at the best square for our queen. Queen takes a7 is a move that we have to consider because that leaves us with two connected pass pawns on the edge of the board. These pass pawns can quickly go down the board and then promote on the a8 or the b8 square. Another move to consider is a move like queen to d7. Queen to d7 pins this pawn so the pawn cannot move, and we're threatening bring our rook and activate all of our pieces. Let's play this move because we're in time trouble and we have to just move our pieces as fast as possible. Now we should play the move h3 as soon as possible so that we create luft and allow the rook to go to c7. Because if we play rook c7 right now, then we hang back rank checkmate. Black has the move queen to e2, which attacks these pawns and brings the queen to a better square. Okay, black goes for this move. Let's try to activate our pieces. Now we can take if we want. We can also play the move h3. Let's play h3 so that we create luft. And now rook f7 would be a blunder because that just hangs a rook. And we get the resignation. d4. This is the move I usually play. d5, very common move. Knight a6 puts the knight on the edge of the board. It's not ideal to play this move. A better move would have been like c5 and then bringing the knight to the c6 square where it puts pressure on the center. e3, best move because it opens up the bishop. Knight f6, pretty good move. Then we play knight d2. We can play many different moves in this position. We can play the move c3, which prevents the knight from ever jumping, and then we can follow it up with the move bishop d3. Bishop d3 straight away might run into knight to b4, and I don't think we want to give up this bishop for this knight. And that kind of justifies the fact that the knight is on a6. We don't want to allow knight to b4 with tempo. So I played this move, which is very flexible. And if they go c5 now, I'm just going to play c3, have a very solid center. By the way, if they take our d4 pawn, we're going to recapture with the e pawn. This creates some imbalance, and it's very similar to like a Caro-Kann position. They play the move knight to e4, which is not a good move because they're moving the same piece twice. In the opening, you should not be trying to do this unless if there's a really good reason to do so. Now we can simply just take the knight, which is the best move. We play the move c3, which opens up the square for our queen, and we can play this move to try to take this pawn. c3 also opens up the queen's diagonal towards this check, which sets up the trap of bishop takes and then win the pawn. The engine doesn't really like this because it's going to argue that this knight here is misplaced and winning the pawn is not much of an advantage. But we play this anyways because we're just winning a pawn. Yes, black has the bishop pair. This is a very close position, so black doesn't have really good luck with his bishops. In an open position with not many pawns on the board, the bishop pair would be dominating the knight. So if the position was more open, then I would have considered not taking the free pawn and losing my bishop. We bring the queen back because the queen has done its job. It took the free pawn. Now it's time to bring it back so that we don't blunder. Bishop here offers a trade. We just take because it's an equal trade and we're trying to simplify into a better position for the white pieces. Get this move, defending the pawn. Then we play knight here, developing the knight. We're intending to castle and then keep our king safe on the g1 square. We castle, queen here, maybe has ideas of putting pressure on the pawn, and let's imagine if the pawn just disappears, then this bishop would be open. but there's a pawn here, so we're relatively safe at this point. We play the move c4. c4 has many ideas. First of all, it tries to improve the position of the knight, which is currently on a2. We can try to go to the c3 square and maybe take this pawn. And also c3 prevents the move d5 because after d5 we play c takes d5 and they cannot recapture with the pawn. They cannot recapture with the pawn because, as in the game, the bishop would be hanging. So they would either have to capture with the queen or the bishop. And in both cases, the position is not ideal for the black pieces. We could have also tried to push, and that leaves us with a passed pawn. This is like an endgame idea, so if we pushed, this is not as good according to the engine, but if we pushed, our idea is to play a3, b4, a4, then this, or b4 straight away, then a4, and then push the queenside majority. And let's imagine if we trade the a pawn for the a pawn, we're going to have two connected pass pawns. So the b pawn and the c pawn are pass pawns, and we can try to win the endgame by pushing the pawns. Okay, let's go back to the game. C takes. This is a mistake, obviously, because it hangs the bishop. There we go. Rook to c8. Good move. Attacks the queen and potentially has ideas of infiltrating. We play this move, preventing the rook from infiltrating. I don't know why this was any better. Maybe it has pressure on this pawn, but we play this move anyways. Okay, we get the move h6, creating the luft, so there are less ideas of back rank checkmate. And rook c1, best move because it threatens to take the rook, or if the rook takes us, we're going to occupy the c-file and have good control of the c-file. Queen here, it attacks the knight on e2. So we move the knight to a better square and also threaten the queen. We also have pressure on the d5 pawn. We take the free pawn. They take our rook. Engine says it's the best move, but I don't think it's the best move because it relinquishes control of the c-file. But also they had nothing much to do and I was threatening this fork. So they had to either move the rook or take my rook, and they decided to take. There we go. f5, and then we play queen to d7, which activates our queen and brings it to a more central square where it can potentially attack the king. Queen to g6, which is not a good move because it doesn't really have an idea. We play this move. Oh wow, I just realized that I missed the fork. I could have won the queen. This is why you should always look for checks and captures. I should have played this, and then after the king moves, then we take the free queen. We play the move h3, which creates luft, and if this rook ever gets to the c1 square, we're not mated. Rook to f7 hangs a rook because we have two attackers and black only has one defender, and they just resign.